I am proud to be part of a species where a subset of its members willingly put their lives at risk to push the boundaries of our existence.
El podcast Interplanetario. La exploración del espacio en beneficio de toda la humanidad. Sus anfitriones en Inglaterra y los Países Bajos, Matt Russell y Julio Aprea.
Oh yeah, baby. Neil deGrasse
Tyson. Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson, not the boxer, but the astrophysicist.
Although I think he used to box or do some sort of wrestling when he was at university.
He probably wouldn't bite your ear off like the other one.
I don't think if it was for science, I mean, he might do it.
Do you know why I've chosen that quote? I could say I chose it for Richard Branson, but I did actually choose it for Bruce McCandless II, who most of this podcast is going to be about. I think that's, he kind of did put his life at risk.
I think, and maybe the name might sound familiar only to some, but Bruce McCandless II is I think, one of the among the top 10 most famous photos from NASA, right? The lonely astronaut flying in space.
Yeah,
that has been used and reused so many times for advertisements.
Actually, it must be in the top 5. Well, because the interview is with his son, and of course, it must be weird. And he even mentions a story where he's driving down the road recently and sees his dad floating around for an advert for something.
Well, in fact, I think everyone thinks that's how astronauts fly every day because of this single photo, when it was only used a few times. But we'll go into details.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But we should also congratulate Sir Dickie Pickles, Richard Branson himself, because he's become the second oldest person ever to go to space. Brackets. Some people don't consider it space. Close bracket.
First one being John Glenn, right?
John Glenn, 77. Richard Branson is going to be 71 in exactly a week.
Why is age a thing here? If the point is to open space for everyone, right?
Yeah, well, actually, the age is quite a good one, because I believe Wally Funk is going to be going up with Jeff Bezos.
Yes, then she will become the oldest. But why are we always looking for records?
First. Yeah, records. No, I agree. You've got a bee in your bonnet about records, haven't you? You don't like the fact that Buzz Aldrin is second person on the moon.
If they had been stranded, they were both stranded there. Not the first, not the second, but both of them. So, it's always, if it's a team effort, it's a team effort, right?
Is it because you're slightly bitter that you're not the first co-host on the podcast?
You got me. I will never get over Jamie.
But Jamie came first. Sorry, Julio.
I will never be your first. But I was the first one that co-hosted right after Jamie left, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm the first one at something. See, records matter now. Anyway, congratulations to Virgin Galactic. Have some. There are some really, really cool people working there. I have to say, I was more excited about Sirisha Banla flying there more than Richard Branson, because I don't know, just from the same crew of Space Generation people, we organized some events at some point. So it's nice to see someone achieving her dream. Like billionaires get whatever they want all the time, but I like to see people that put their effort, work it and achieve their dreams. That to me is much more motivational or inspirational than Branson.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. That is awesome. That is awesome. It'd be interesting to see. I still don't know how long Virgin Galactic's going to be around for.
Why do you say that?
I think a lot of people are not convinced by the business case.
This one and the other one, first, second, Karman line, no Karman line. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
First, it's not the first of anything, because the first orbital flight was done by Alan Shepard, who was not even first into space, because that was Yuri Gagarin. So after Gagarin and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, what's there to do, what was left there. It's after that you have to start cherry picking. We are the first ones of this in this situation, in this situation, in this situation, and once you have to narrow it down so much, that record doesn't matter so much anymore, right?
True. Although I'm going to be pretty chuffed when I'm the first man on Mars. That's got to be a record, right? That I could get.
Well, that would be the first man on another planet.
Yeah, that'd be pretty good.
I think that one would count. But that one is that first person on Mars is the only one that can trump Apollo 11 and Yuri Gagarin.
Yeah,
that's the okay. First, and further on, maybe more interesting. But actually, no. Actually, I think Mars would be the big one because it's the first time we would be on another planet, right? But we're talking about a lot about records, something I'm against.
Yeah. I know. It's because I knew it was winding up. So, like Julio.
I tell you how little I care about records. That apparently Argentina won something some days ago. Some football game. I don't know if you're familiar with that sport.
I am. Listeners, just so you're aware, it is now like 30 minutes into the England game, and Julio is definitely is stalling, so I can't watch the football match. That's how committed I am to the podcast. I'm not watching the England final of the European Championship.
But Matt, why suffer during those 90 plus minutes when you can just at the end just find out the result? Like today, the Virgin Galactic flight. I did not watch it. I just waited until the end and then saw the results. Why stress yourself during those times? It's not stress that belongs to you. Why live through that suffering?
You've got a good point, but maybe short-term stress is sometimes quite nice.
Yeah, but when it's something that is worth it, what is worth of? Now we're going deep. I'm going to make some enemies. But what is exciting about watching like 22 guys running after a ball, or what is? Look, okay, maybe you can say it's like watching a movie. Why watch a movie when I can just tell you the ending, right? I guess if you enjoy it as I will enjoy a movie, but yeah.
Listeners, don't get too discouraged by Julio. Right, Julio. What I wanted to talk about because we've got Bruce McCandless III on is his dad, and more actually one aspect of what Bruce McCandless II did, and that is the MMU and similar sorts of things.
The Manned Maneuvering Unit.
Yeah.
Which now would be the Human Maneuvering Unit.
Oh, yeah.
These days of political correctness, I guess it would be called the HMU, right?
The HMU, it probably would be.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're actually right. I actually think you probably are absolutely right with that.
Well, this was a sort of propulsion unit, like spaceship on its own. You know how we always talk about like an astronaut's spacesuit is a self-contained spaceship, but with limited propulsion because normally you're tethered. But this is the propulsion system for that one-person spaceship. And I think it's you saw it. You see it in the photos. It's one of the coolest looking. I think you found some in the history that we will go in details that look even more insane. But yes, that photo that shows you in space is. I would find it terrifying to be disconnected from the shuttle or the station or wherever you are.
Yeah, no, it's clearly got to be incredibly stressful to be in just like untethered on something like that. But yes,
and by the way, this hardware unit was used 3 times in 3 missions, not 3 times in 3 missions, and but since then it seems to be like the go-to for every movie when they show astronauts in space. They are always using this. But if you want, we can see what these 3 missions were. Yeah. The first mission where the MMU was tested was Space Shuttle Mission 41B. And, this is where Bruce McCandless II tested the MMU with Robert Stewart. And, this was in February 7th, 1984. The second mission, and this was a big selling point for the MMU, one of the big selling points of the MMU, the way that they got it approved was as a sort of satellite servicing device that you can go and capture satellites to bring them back in the shuttle and service them, right? Which is interesting. It's interesting that he was working on servicing back then, because later we're going to go into Hubble with him, right?
I don't know much about that kind of stuff, but it seems to me quite crazy to approach a satellite while sort of flying this one personal spacecraft, and because presumably the satellite is moving in its own kind of way.
Presumably, if you have the satellite non-functional, and if it had some abnormal rotation, if you would not align and try to grab it, you could be
flung
away.
Spun off.
Yes, indeed. Well, by now we know the ending. That, I mean, this was used only a few times, and now we use the robotic arms to deal with these sort of things, especially during the shuttle era. They moved to that. But let's go into those details later. So the second mission of the MMU was in the shuttle mission 41C, where astronauts Jane van Hoften, I guess from a Dutch family, Dutch origins, and George Nelson.
Who sounds like he's from an English family, but who knows?
Well, I mean, Nelson, it's like Perez in Spanish, right?
Yeah.
Every third British is a Nelson. So yeah, no, anyway, in this second mission, these two astronauts attempted to use it to capture the solar maximum spacecraft that was malfunctioning. Every development needs funding. That funding allocated to the MMU, a big part of it was because you could sell that missions where you spend billions of dollars and you have a malfunction in space that you can recover them and not just waste those taxpayer money funds. This is pretty interesting because it really did not work as planned, right?
No.
Do you want to go into the details?
Well, I mean, the details, as far as I understand it, is that what they're trying to do is attach something to the satellite so that they can then pull it back into the shuttle payload bay for storage and then bring it back down to be repaired. They're not going to try and attempt repairing it in space, are they?
I don't know. Actually, let's find out if the solar maximum mission was brought back to Earth or not.
Oh yeah, the second objective of STS was to capture, repair, and redeploy. So yes, it did. So they put it into the bay, repaired it, and then redeployed it.
Yeah, you save a launch. If you can repair it in space, much better, right?
Yeah, God. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? So, but basically the astronauts the astronaut that had flown over, James Van Hoften and George Nelson, were flying over in their MMUs, trying to grapple with this satellite, but presumably the satellite they were trying to null the rate of this thing, like rotating around, using the MMU to try and, as in using their own kind of propulsion to try and stop this thing from spinning. But it was getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where ground control basically had to step in and control the satellite properly from the ground to get it stable again. And it almost was ripped to pieces by its own kind of tumble or whatever. And so they were actually really lucky to actually recover the mission altogether. So the MMU hadn't really worked at all by the sounds of it.
Yeah, what I found interesting in our research was that the plan was to use the MMU to grapple the solar maximum with the what they call a trunnion pin attachment device, or TPAD, mounting between the hand controllers of the MMU, as you said, to null its rotation rates and allow the shuttle to bring it into the payload for stowage and servicing. But these attempts failed because the jaws of this TPAD could not lock onto the solar max because there was an obstructing grommet on the satellite, right, not included in the blueprints for the satellite. And I recall reading this sort of event in Kathy Sullivan's book, And yeah, it makes sense. You make your maybe these days you can update the blueprints as you go because we live in this digital age. But back in those days, you design the spacecraft, you make your blueprints, then it goes to production. And if last minute, they have to make some changes, it's not... Ideally, all those changes should have been documented into the blueprint, but it could happen that, I don't know, some technician last minute had to make a call and then it's not documented, and people on the ground are working on the with their blueprints as reference because they don't have a view of how the satellite looks in real time, right? So this shows how important it is to document if you make changes to your spacecraft. You launch a space shuttle. You have people doing a spacewalk with this MMU device, and you cannot grapple because someone forgot to update the blueprints. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I guess the knock-on effect of that is, you kind of, just like I said, you feel as though you've lost faith in doing it via the MMU because they were able to go and grapple this thing with the shuttle's robotic arm, the SRMS, or the Canadarm as most people refer to it, and so it's like, well, if we can grab it with the Canadarm, why bother risking a couple of astronauts? It does seem a little bit... It seems like it was a sort of over-engineered approach to going out and getting satellites.
Well, Matt, if you could go and get a lunar sample with a robot, why would you ever send a human? With that reasoning... let's face it, we don't need humans in space. We do it
don't even need them on Earth.
Okay. Radical. Is there something you want to share with us?
I don't
want to... What I mean is, yes, with robotic arms, we can do certain things. And the precision, the strength, the robots bring that. Humans are there for the unexpected. Although in this case, there was something unexpected and the robot fixed it. I understand where you're going. But for the unexpected, for the adaptability, right? As you normally get comments on the sort of, well, we are spending so many billions to send these spacecrafts to Mars just to look at some samples in a certain way. Well, if you could put a human there, you could do a lot more science and determine much quicker if there's life on Mars or not, instead of going over decades and decades of mission after mission after mission.
Yeah, potentially, although...
That's one of the reasonings. I don't mean I necessarily agree with it. That's what you normally say to justify it.
Yeah. I'll totally... Well... The good thing, this is all happening in 1984. There's another mission, STS-51A, which is Joe Allen and Dale Gardner. And they did manage to fly out to two satellites, the Westar 7 and the Palapar B2, and drag them back to the orbiter payload bay, to the shuttle payload bay, and return. So those ones did return to Earth. So they were faulty, got them back on. The shuttle brought them back to Earth to be repaired. I wonder if they went back up. I would have thought they did.
Otherwise, what was the point in recovering them, right?
Oh, yes. So they were reflown.
Well, if the satellite is not really functioning and you're going to recover it, and you spend the cost of recovering it with the shuttle and bringing it back, you better launch it again, right?
Yeah. Imagine how expensive that thing is to put that effort in to go and get it.
But that was at the time the thinking, you could bring them back, shuttle is easy, flying every week or every month or a few times a month, and then servicing them, upgrading the computer, sending them back up. It didn't turn out like that mostly for economic reasons.
Does it feel like we've gone a little bit backwards like that? As in, it almost seems too radical for words, doesn't it, to go up and grab a satellite and bring it back? I mean, now that sounds amazing.
Okay, there was a whole architecture at the time with the shuttle, with humans. The shuttle was supposed to do everything. And someday we can talk about how the shuttle having to do everything meant so many requirements from so many actors that ended up hurting the design of the shuttle. And eventually how the Ariane rocket was at the right moment, at the right time to capture the market that the shuttle left behind. But I think that's a whole episode that we can do on the history of that someday.
Yeah.
I don't think we haven't gone backwards. Sometimes we thought of certain ways of doing things, and sometimes it takes an event or something to make you wake up and realize that maybe it's just easier.
But hasn't Elon Musk's been making some kind of mutterings, hasn't he, recently about gobbling up satellites and debris with his Starship?
Well, getting rid of space debris is a completely different topic than recovering and servicing. Well, what I was trying to say here is that right now there are actually some existing successful servicing missions. Okay, so these MEV type of missions, like MEV2 launching on Ariane 5 last year, right?
Yeah.
That they can just dock, and instead of repairing the satellite, some of them can refuel it, or some of them can just grab it and take control and keep it working for a few more years. And I mean, it's in the name, mission extension. This means that for a fraction of the cost of developing a whole new satellite, that company, like in this case Intelsat, can benefit from the revenue generated by that satellite for a number more of years. It's probably a very interesting return on investment to keep that thing working for longer than you expected at the fraction of the cost of putting a new one up there, right? Of course, at some point, you might need a more powerful payload, more functional payload, and eventually you need newer satellites. But I sort of like this whole maintainability, serviceability aspects. We will talk about it a little bit later. In fact, missions like the MEV are not necessarily... okay, you enter into this sort of design philosophy in which do you make the satellite serviceable or not? I said we were going to go into it later, but let's just go into it now, makes me think of those old designs of cars, like, 60s and 70s, that they were meant to be for the owner to repair himself. While now, if you get any car for the most minimal thing, you kind of have to take it to the garage, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a whole philosophy on design too, if you want to make it serviceable or not. So for now, you can have these sort of missions that go to satellites that were not designed with service in mind and overtake them in not so subtle ways. But eventually, if you have satellites with like standard ports and interfaces, there's a lot of literature on that. You could have a whole architecture of repairs. You could replace solar panels for new ones, just like we do in the space station, but automatically. I would find it pretty cool if we went that way.
Yeah, I mean that does seem to be the way forward. I wonder what the block is there.
Just talking about refueling, you could change the solar panels or other subsystems. You could upgrade the payload with a new computer, just similar to the sort of work done on Hubble, but automatically, without putting humans at risk. Pretty cool, yeah?
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. You could even replace fuel tanks if they were sort of modular things that would just snap on and snap off. Yeah. Although there's a lot of plumbing there, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's hard to do.
But Matt, look at how much I am going away from the topic just to keep you away from your football game.
Yeah, I know. You are really mean.
I would say let's go back to our topic today of the MMU for now, and other propulsion devices.
Just so listeners are aware, I am keeping a tab on it. It's currently 1-0 to England and it's half time. This is very exciting.
Matt, that game is just one game of many. This podcast is for history.
Exactly.
For decades.
This will go on forever. This will still be relevant in 4 years' time, and that game won't be. Okay, Julio, why is it, do you think, that the MMU, after sort of using it 3 times in 1984, and then on that third mission, it was, successfully used. It's something that is iconic. It's pretty much how everyone sees astronauts flying around in space and think that that's how it's done, particularly when they look at George Clooney in Gravity. So why did it get retired, do you think?
Well, we are all aware of what happened to the Challenger, right? And there was a big safety review right after, with participation from people like Feynman, okay? Or I don't know if I should mention Bob Sick or not.
Yeah, we can mention.
Okay, we have the interview in the can. So he was a legend, and during those times as well. And we will release that interview at some point. There was a whole review of what really the shuttle was needed for and not, and there were several changes. One of them, for instance, not using the MMU, but others. Well, the shuttle now, will not be used any longer for commercial missions. It was a major review for the space shuttle program, and it certainly reduced the scope of missions that the shuttle would do. One of its main purposes after was all about assembly of the space station. That was absolutely needed for that. But where the shuttle was not needed, you would choose another type of vehicle that would be safer.
Yeah. I mean, it got to the point where they would have a shuttle on standby just in case the shuttle that had gone up was in trouble. I mean, it's like suddenly they realized that it was a little bit of a death trap.
No, I would not call it a death trap. I mean,
well, I mean,
the shuttle, I one of my biggest regrets is probably not seeing a shuttle launch. And I think it's an amazing machine. And like I said earlier, I think one of the tragedies was what you call requirement creep up. You start with an idea, simple, concrete, you want to build that, and then you have more and more users or stakeholders involved that wanted to use in another way and say, no, it has to be bigger, it has to do this, it has to do that. And then you end up with a very, very complex machine. But still, probably my most favorite and the most amazing spaceship we will have for decades, because now we want to keep it simple.
Yeah. I don't know. I think if we really are going to be seeing Starship flying, I think that's going to be up there as well, isn't it? As up there with the space shuttle, surely. Although I do agree, the space shuttle, when you see it taking off and just the absolutely insanity of what that looks like.
I mean, who can tell about history in a few decades from now? But shuttle was space for a couple of decades. That's all you got, apart from Mir, of course, that also so spectacular. So, like I said, for me, the shuttle is one of the most amazing machines we had, and well, it went how it went, but we learned a lot from it.
Yeah. I mean, incredible. So the MMU, they cancelled it essentially as part of a safety review. So there's the two MM units, the MMU #2 and the MMU #3 that were flown. You can actually go see them at the National Air and Space Museum, and the other one is at the Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, in Alabama. So they're actually all on display. The mock-up one that never flew is at the Johnson Space Center as well.
We should do a space tour at some point when we can travel again.
Oh my God! Oh, totally. I really plan on doing that.
Rent a van and travel through all these U.S. museums of space and related items, memorabilia, and meet the audience as we go.
Absolutely. We've there's members of the audience who offered to put us up as well. So I'll go back through my emails.
Who knows? Even maybe record some episodes on the road. That would be quite an adventure.
Yeah, it'd be absolutely amazing. Yeah, we should totally do that. I really, really want to do that next year.
The Russians had one as well.
Oh, the Russians had an ace one. It was called the SPK. It was tested on Mir, on the Mir space station, to get round, the Mir space station to parts where you couldn't get. But they realised actually it was easier, a bit like, the conclusion before, that it was easier to use the Strela crane, which was similar to the mobile servicing system. So it ended up not really being useful either. and the actual, I believe that the SPK was attached to one of the modules of the Mir when it re-entered and was burnt up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, so we cannot see it in the museum.
No, so no museum. There's the 21KS, which is a redesign of the Orlan spacesuit, which has like a sort of inbuilt system as well. But I got to go right back because I think definitely the BIS, the British Interplanetary Society, deserve a bit of a shout out here because in 1949, H.E. Ross and R.A. Smith, and I've brought this book up before. In fact, I've got my copy of it here, The Exploration of the Moon by R.A. Smith with Arthur C. Clarke as the writer of the words. But there's some great pictures in there, and one of them is of an astronaut in the spacesuit that you can actually go see at the Leicester Space Centre. There's a replica of this spacesuit, which is one of the very first designs of spacesuits.
I think you should add this. This photo is amazing. This drawing, this concept is amazing. You should add it into the show notes.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. It's one of my favourite drawings because there's a sort of very comedic element to it, but it's a sort of self-manoeuvring kind of little jet that you hold in your hands, and you can, a bit like in the film WALL-E where he's flying around with the fire extinguisher.
Or Gravity.
It's a bit, or Gravity, where you can kind of fly around. Where here is 1949, there is that concept right away from the BIS, and that was all sort of written up in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society.
But I think at some point we realized that orbital mechanics are a little bit more complicated than pointing a bottle to get somewhere.
Well, you say that, but Ed White did it. There was a thing called the zip gun.
Yes,
that they used.
Yes, and it was complicated. This is exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to use. Michael Collins used it, Gemini 10, and Ed White on Gemini 4. So,
and then you have the in 1966 the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, or AMU.
Yeah. How does that work? Was that like that's another backpack type thing? So that must be the predecessor.
It was using hydrogen peroxide as the fuel.
Oh, this is the one. This is the one where they have to have metal pants, isn't it? Because you,
metal pants is the name of my is the name of my heavy metal cover band.
Woven metal pants made of Cromwell R metal cloth. That's
So the AMU was cool. Actually more performant than the MMU.
Yeah.
However, it was never tested. During the interview, he goes into the tale of Gene Cernan and what happened.
Yeah.
But yes, this idea that, I mean, it's a hot gas propulsion. So the astronaut had to wear, as you said, woven metal pants made of Cromwell R metal cloth, just to not burn away, which also gives you the solution for jetpacks.
But I guess wearing metal pants makes you heavier, therefore you have to have more performance.
It's always the same, more payload, you need more fuel.
And then more fuel means that you need more metal on your pants.
Exactly.
So pesky, isn't it? The old orbital mechanics and everything else to do with rockets.
The good old rocket equation.
Yeah, so there wasn't much need for EVA during Apollo and Skylab, but they did test a couple of things on Skylab, which was another precursor to the MMU, which was the ASMU, the Automatically Stabilized Maneuvering Unit, 1973. So that was tested on Skylab 3 and 4 missions. They never went outside with those because they didn't want to damage the solar arrays on the Apollo telescope.
Right.
So So that they were very, very careful. They also had a foot controlled one as well, the FCMU, which they tested on Skylab.
But by the way, short segue here, but you actually spoiler, I actually listened to the interview before this recording. But you guys talk a little bit about Dick Slayton, who is a legend. And in his autobiography, he mentioned that the AMU that we were talking shortly before, the one that Gene Cernan was supposed to test, what may have been developed because the Air Force, the United States Air Force, thought they might have the chance to inspect someone else's satellites.
Yeah.
I wonder of what nationality those satellites would be.
Yeah, I wonder. Well,
we're talking
I
the
guess,
60s.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that really would be a major use, wouldn't it, of the MMU if you were flying up? Because a visual inspection by a human at that point probably is considerably better than a visual inspection by a robot.
There was no digital photography. Well, actually, I don't know if at that time they were still using film or not on those missions. But you would not have the resolution that a human could provide. And I mean, obviously, I would assume this would be for stealth inspection, because if you do something to a satellite, probably a telemetry they could tell, right?
Yeah, but if you go over with a torch and just have a look at it, what does it do? It's amazing. Maybe you would.
Depends what kind of torch you don't want to. With an actual torch. Anyway,
I mean, it's
vandalism in space. Maybe they would. Maybe they could leave a graffiti on it.
So what are they left with now? They're left. Bruce McCandless does mention this in the interview, doesn't it? It's safer is the thing that they're left with now.
Yeah,
which is
just in case of emergencies.
Yeah, you don't ever use it. But did you know that safer was almost ended in disaster with a English-born space shuttle astronaut, Piers Sellers, on STS-121 when he was testing shuttle repair techniques. The latch of the safer unit unlatched. And Mike Fossum had to tether to him to continue the spacewalk. And then after that, the latches are secured with captain tape, which is the equivalent of the roadie method of putting gaffer tape on everything.
Fine, but Sellers was not untethered.
No.
So he wasn't at risk. It's more like you add an extra tether because you want to have a double redundancy for double failure, right?
So the safer is acting as your dual redundant system, your second safety system.
I don't know the operations when they did that. Right now, I think they tethered twice, or what is it? Two or three times, two or three separate tethers that they use.
And Mark Lee and Carl Mead actually flew the safer up and around the shuttle's robotic arm as a demonstration. Which seems pretty amazing. So I wonder they must have been tethered, surely.
Yeah.
But
But enough of technical talk and speculation. I have to say I really enjoyed this interview, and I can't wait for the audience to listen to it.
Yeah, he's such a lovely guy, Bruce McCandless III. I really, really liked him. And he'd actually listened to the podcast. He knew all your names.
Yeah, although he did say that Lynn is his favorite co-host. So now,
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Is that why you don't like First? Oh, such a pity.
Lynn is also my favorite co-host.
I couldn't possibly say who my favorite co-host is. It's Lynn, everyone. No, it's not. That'd be awful. Right. Of course, it's Jamie. Everyone knows it's Jamie. Shall we have a listen to the interview?
Écoutez.
Oh, he stole it.
The Interplanetary podcast, putting the ace
Back into space. I am joined on the podcast by Bruce McCandless III. Welcome to the podcast, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
In the UK, we don't know many of the American shuttle astronaut names, but I do think actually Bruce McCandless II is certainly one of the ones that I think a lot of kind of space enthusiasts know, and it's mainly because of that super iconic image of your dad floating in space, untethered.
Yeah. That was that I think is I think I'm justified in saying that's one of the iconic NASA space photos. You know, you got the Earthrise photo from Apollo 8, and you've got Buzz Aldrin on the moon, and of course from Hubble you got the Pillars of Creation shot. But I do think that the photograph taken by Hoot Gibson of Bruce McCandless, I don't know if you describe it as propelling away, drifting, not drifting, but moving away from the shuttle with the manned maneuvering unit back in 1984. I do think that's one of the great images from our early days of space exploration.
Right, but before we do a deep dive into your book, because I mean this is one of the reasons why you're on. You've got a book out about your dad and his journey. Before we dive into that, how old were you when your dad did that untethered spaceflight?
I was 22, and I was actually in England when it happened. I was at the University of Reading. I was a graduate student there, and I saw most of it. Whatever I saw on British television, and Matthew, I think I'm a little older than you. You may not remember it, but the footage was not all that compelling at the time. In fact, it was Hoot Gibson's photograph, I think, more than anything else, that sort of captured the majesty of the moment and has sort of locked that image into our minds. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I do think it was the photograph rather than the video imagery from that flight. No,
I think you're definitely right. I mean, I do actually remember it because being a space nut, I do actually remember the footage. But I definitely think that in the public imagination, I think everyone assumes that all EVAs are done in that manner as well.
Yeah, right.
But what did you think when you saw? Have you seen the film Gravity, where George Clooney is whizzing around?
Absolutely, I've seen Gravity. That's that's a souped-up version of the MMU for sure. The MMU or jetpack-like devices, they show up in a number of films. There's one made in 1969 called Marooned. I don't know if you remember this film. It's not a great movie, but basically American astronauts go up to what looks like the Skylab space station. They perform experiments with a fledgling MMU. Later they go to return to Earth, and there's a malfunction in the spacecraft, and they're, as the title implies, they're marooned in space. And Gene Hackman is one of the astronauts, and David Jansen's another, and was it Peter Franciscus, I think is the third, big good looking guy, and Gene Hackman goes crazy, and David Jansen sacrifices himself for the good of the crew, and eventually a Soviet cosmonaut shows up in a Soyuz and attempts to rescue him, and all he has is he doesn't have an MMU. He has to try to use his tether to work himself over to the American spacecraft, and he doesn't make it. But fortunately, another American astronaut shows up and some version of the X-24 space plane, and he does have an MMU, and he managed to come over and save the two surviving American astronauts, and so that's another example of how jetpacks, they've captured the American imagination, or the imagination of people who are interested in space exploration, but for now at least they're not being used except in some vestigial sense in that. The safer device, which is the mini jetpack that the astronauts wear these days on the ISS when they go to do EVAs, that's a descendant of the manned maneuvering unit. NASA decided that the MMU wasn't going to be used in its 1984 configuration, and it was eventually adapted by Joe Kerwin, among others, as what we call now the safer device. That's the self-assisted rescue device, basically.
Do you get pangs of pride when you see films with with that kind of jetpack? I mean, the George Clooney one in particular, because it is so reminiscent of that.
Absolutely.
That image,
I can't watch anything these days without without watching with interest to see how the astronauts are going to maneuver outside one of their space vehicles. I think I just read Project Hail Mary, Andy Weir's book, about contact with I don't want to reveal anything about the book, but needless to say, there are sequences where the astronaut in Andy Weir's book goes outside the spacecraft and needs to maneuver around, and I couldn't help thinking that things would have been easier with an MMU, so and in The Martian, you may recall Jessica Chastain rescues the main character using a jetpack, so yeah, it's fascinating to see that and to wonder what's going to happen in the future. I think that the MMU or some jetpack device is going to make a comeback one of these days as we become more comfortable with the risks involved in moving around outside of the space vehicle.
Yeah, well, it's certainly one of the coolest things that's ever been in space. You've written a book about Bruce McCandless II. Tell us a little bit about why you thought you were going to, because obviously you're a writer yourself, and you've an accomplished writer. Why this project, and where you chose to start from in this project as well?
Yeah, good question. This isn't really my story to tell. It's my dad's story to tell, and he was not without a sense of ego. He was a smart individual. He was proud of his engineering abilities, but he was not the kind of person who would talk about himself or talk about his accomplishments almost to a debilitating extent, career-wise. He was very unassuming, wasn't the kind of person who liked to, like I say, advance his own interests. And so, during the course of his life, he was approached at least 3 times by people who wanted to write his story. And he, for whatever reason, didn't feel like doing it, didn't feel like it was worth telling. I don't know exactly what the issue was, but not long before he died in 2017, he changed his mind, and actually during a visit to Great Britain, when he was speaking in Pontefract up in I think that's up in Yorkshire.
Yep, yeah. He
had discussed the autobiography with some folks up there, and they had actually come up with a title, Untethered, which he really liked. But before he could really get started on it, he fell ill and died in December of 2017. This was an attempt to write the story he would have written. I mean, I don't have the technical expertise to do that, so I suspect the book suffers in that regard. On the other hand, because he was so unassuming, I feel like sometimes he missed some of the drama in his life, and I've tried to tell the human story at least as much as the engineering story. I hope I've conveyed some of the arc of his life and career in the book.
I mean, one of the story arcs that comes out virtually instantly is how long it took him to get his first flight, being that he was in with one of the very first Apollo astronauts, and then the Apollo program stopped, and then he has to wait a long time.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, as you point out, he was picked in Group 5 in April of 1966, and that group was identified in the newspapers as hey, these are the Apollo astronauts. and indeed many of them did fly on Apollo. And I have a photograph of him in a little news story from one of the papers out in California where he was at the time, with the headline, "I'm off to moon. I'm off to the moon, dear," and photograph of him and little bio. But things didn't work out for him, as you know. He like I said, he was in Group 5. He was the youngest of that group, and for a while was the youngest of the astronauts. Period. He was a sort of a prodigy. He had gone to the Naval Academy, finished second in his class, became a fighter pilot, went on to study at Stanford University and earned his Master of Science degree in 1 year, and had done the coursework for his PhD in another year, and was working on his dissertation when he was selected to be part of the group. We moved to Houston, and he seemed to be right on track, and the best evidence of that is that he was given this plum assignment of being the capsule communicator for Apollo 11. And so when Charlie Duke handled the Capcom duties when the Eagle was descending to the lunar surface, but it was Bruce McCandless who was actually talking to Neil and Buzz when they first set foot on the moon. And you can still hear his voice on a lot of those, on those old recordings, and it's pretty cool. And what a great spot to be in. And as you know, Charlie Duke and Fred Hayes and some of the other folks from Group 5 went on to Apollo assignments and went to the moon. But his career, something happened, and he was essentially sidelined. He didn't go up on Apollo, didn't go up on Skylab, didn't get a chance to go up on the Apollo-Soyuz test project, and it was unclear for a long time whether he'd get a shuttle assignment. And I spend a fair amount of time in the book talking about that, because that was sort of that's what I remember most about growing up and family life. It's this this wondering when Dad was going to get a flight and what happened, and my mom and my mother was just a completely unobjective partisan for my dad, and so my mom, my sister, and I were like the three witches from Macbeth. We were concocting all kinds of theories, but Dad never complained about it. He stuck around, but something definitely happened that derailed his career, and he had to work very hard to sort of get back in the good graces of NASA and to get that shuttle flight in 1984.
And you have no sort of clue about what that incident or what that sort of...
Well, yeah, no, we have. We do have clues. I mean, Rick Houston and Milt Heflin wrote a book called Go Flight, in which they discuss an incident, and I talk about it in the book, in which Dad, as Capcom, was doing his duties that day, talking to Armstrong and Aldrin, and according to the book, Deke Slayton, who was sort of the king of the astronauts, and especially to someone like my dad, who was a rookie. Slayton came over and said to my dad as Capcom, "Hey, bring him in." And of course, Bruce McCandless didn't have any authority to bring in the astronauts, and that wasn't a directive that had come from the flight director, and so he was put in this difficult position. What to do? You've got your boss on one hand, and you've got your protocols and everything you practiced on the other, and maybe your loyalty even to the astronauts on the moon. He basically ignored Slayton. And the idea is that by ignoring Slayton, he may have been ignoring even Chris Kraft. And the sense is that he offended Slayton, and Slayton didn't like being offended. And that didn't help his chances. Now there were other things that probably affected the whole long wait, but that's certainly one important factor.
Wow, yeah, that seems exceptionally tough on him. I mean,
I mean, Matthew, think about that. I mean, like my dad once said, he was sort of like a god to me and the other guys there, and what do you do? This is one of the most important moments in the history of the world. And Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are up there on the moon. The world is watching, and Slayton tells you to bring them in. What do you do? It was a tough spot. Like I said, there were other things. I mean, he wasn't a backslapper. He wasn't a promoter. He wasn't socially very smooth. He and my mother were not actually very social at all. He could be a little abrasive sometimes. When he thought he was right about an engineering issue, he could be, as one of his fellow astronauts put it, difficult, quote unquote. I think there are probably. I'll point out one other thing too. As you probably know, there was a big divide back in those days between the test pilot astronauts and the so-called scientific astronauts and the science astronauts, and we had guys like Armstrong and Joe Engle on one side, and then you had Harrison Schmitt and Joe Kerwin and those guys, Owen Gary, the science astronauts on the other, and he wasn't really in either group. He in a way he was brought into the program too soon because he hadn't received his PhD in electrical engineering yet, and he hadn't gone to test pilot school. He only had 4 years as a fighter pilot, which, believe it or not, at NASA in those days didn't necessarily mean you were a great pilot, which seems strange to us. I mean, flying off of aircraft carriers and back onto aircraft carriers seems like a pretty good attestation to me that you're a good pilot. But he was somewhere in the middle there. He didn't really have a group to associate with. So he had a lot of. He was lucky to get in so young. On the other hand, it didn't end up helping him much, at least in the first 10, 15 years of his career there.
Yeah, I mean, so after that disappointment, I mean, do you remember what sort of spurred him to sort of stay with the agency and just keep going?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was. I mentioned this in the book, and I think it was pride. I think it was maybe wounded pride, even. I mentioned finding, and when my dad died, he and my mom, it turns out, were borderline hoarders. They kept everything every scrap of paper they ever touched, it seemed like, and so to this day, I'm still going through files. But one thing that I found in my dad's files was not one, not two, three. I found 6 copies of an article from November of 1973 that basically was titled "The Forgotten Astronaut," and it talked about how Bruce McCandless was a washout. He never got a flight, and the chances were not looking good for him ever getting a flight. And he hadn't gone out and clipped these articles himself, but ironically, he'd been sent these articles by friends and colleagues, and I think it really stung, and I think he was determined to stick around until the bitter end, until they either kicked him out or he got a flight. But he wasn't going to leave on his own. And the promise of the of the space shuttle was that we'd have economical space travel and frequent space travel sometime by the end of the 70s. So there was a possibility for flight there in the future at some point. And I think his injured pride sort of compelled him to stay where he was and to work toward getting a flight on the shuttle. And unfortunately, the shuttle kept, like any big space project, the timeline slipped and the expenses got higher, and so it was a frustrating time for him. And the late 70s generally were a difficult time for him, and it eventually worked out, but it certainly wasn't a given. And one thing that I admire about him was his unwillingness to go away. I mean, And we can talk a little bit more about that. Am I answering your question?
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. It's really fascinating. I mean, because I'm sitting here thinking, when you've got a job, sometimes you feel as though you're out of a groove, but he can't have just been sitting there twiddling his thumbs. He must have found a groove at NASA that, a kind of a calling at NASA. Was there anything sort of like an engineering project or something like that really kind of, at least he had that and he was sort of progressing in that and felt as though he was, achieving something without regardless of the space flight element of it?
Well, that's okay, Matthew. That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. I mean, he you couldn't, you couldn't twiddle your thumbs there. I mean, you were surrounded by, and I'll just backtrack here a minute. Another reason why he didn't get a flight on Apollo is not because he was bad, it's because so many of those other guys were so damn good. Everyone around you was Captain Kirk basically, and they were the best and the brightest for sure. So if there was anything you did that was objectionable, you might fall behind the rest of the group. But what you asked if he found his niche, and he did, and the niche was working on what became the MMU. Now, just after he joined the space program in 1966, Gene Cernan went up on one of the Gemini flights and attempted to use what was called then the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, the AMU, which was an early version of the MMU. It was a jetpack. At that time, they were experimenting with using hydrogen peroxide as the propellant, and Gene Cernan went outside the Gemini craft, tried to work his way back to where the AMU was basically stowed on the exterior of the capsule, and basically had a tremendous difficulty getting there. He overexerted himself. He had trouble with the tether. His visor started fogging up. His heart rate was way up. He finally got to the AMU and managed to get himself strapped in, but by that point, his vitals were so askew that I think Tom Stafford made the call to who was commanding the mission, made the call to abort the experiment. So Gene Cernan came in abashed and somewhat embarrassed that he hadn't been able to do what he was tasked to do, and the AMU did not get a test on Gemini. It was he was supposed to do it, and then at one point Buzz Aldrin was supposed to do it on Gemini 12, and it's funny, but if you look at the records, NASA sort of soured on use of the jetpack at that point, and like I said, it wasn't used in Gemini. It wasn't planned for any use on Apollo, and basically the next time it got a workout or a test, a chance, basically was on Skylab. And so between 66 and 1973, Bruce McCandless worked with a guy named Ed Whitsitt, former Air Force officer, and the engineers at NASA to develop a working jetpack. And so it was actually tested on Skylab on a couple of the missions. And it wasn't tested outside. It was actually tested inside Skylab in the orbital workshop. And by that time, McCandless and Whitsitt had worked out a lot of the kinks in the machine, and it worked really well. In fact, Alan Bean said, "Hey, I'd have been willing to take it outside, even in 1973." And so the machine got a ringing endorsement from the astronauts who tried it out, and it was put on the back of the table for possible use on the shuttle, and that was Bruce McCandless's niche, and that was the way he kept going at NASA, and how he made his name. He was a great engineer, and so was Ed Whitsitt, and they came up with what turned out to be this marvelous device.
It's through that kind of engineering flair then that meant that he could hang on to that dream of maybe one day actually getting a space flight.
Yeah, exactly. some of the astronauts when they came to NASA, they were stuck in the Apollo applications program, which meant that they were working on possibly impractical ideas that to use Apollo technology for various things, and he was one of those guys put in Apollo applications, and part of his problem was that he liked it, and he didn't realize he'd been put in an unattractive assignment maybe, and so like I said, he got involved with this jetpack idea after another astronaut named Ed Gibbons died in a car wreck, and sunk his teeth into it, and saw the thing through from 66 to 84 basically, and even beyond. He was a big advocate for use of the MMU, and despite NASA's misgivings about it.
Because the MMU didn't become a kind of continual feature on the International Space Station, it's not used. Was that a source of disappointment, or because you've been involved with the project for so long, it's quite hard to sort of presume it's a baby that you can't let go of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a disappointment. Like I say, after 86 and Challenger. Well, I will say, as you know, so the MMU was used in 84 when Bruce McCandless and Bob Stewart tested it out, and then in a later flight that year, Pinky Nelson went out and grabbed the malfunctioning Solar Max satellite not due to any problem with the MMU, but due to an issue related to how to attach to the Solar Max. He wasn't able to use the MMU to do it, but the Solar Max satellite was recovered and eventually repaired. And then on a later flight than that, astronauts Joe Allen and Dale Gardner used the MMU to successfully go out and grab a couple of malfunctioning communication satellites. And the MMU worked, I'm not going to say flawlessly, but it worked really well and did exactly what it was supposed to do. It wasn't discontinued because it wasn't useful. It was discontinued because it was somewhat more dangerous, and because people could do with the shuttle, you could get the orbiter itself close enough to do most of the tasks that you could get the orbiter close enough and have people go out with tethers and do things, and you didn't have the added risk factor of someone floating away in the MMU. But the machine itself was great, and Bruce McCandless and Ed Whitsitt and other folks, not only at NASA but at MMU, the chief contractor, were disappointed that it wasn't used more, and in fact engaged in a more or less I won't say covert, it was fairly overt lobbying campaign to get it used again, even after my dad left NASA and went to Lockheed Martin. They were still coming up with ideas and pitching them to NASA on how to use the MMU. So yeah, they were disappointed. I mean, I think they were somewhat mollified by the fact that NASA adapted the MMU to become safer. And like I said, that is still used every time the astronauts go out of the space station. They put on this little device that is like a mini MMU.
That's not the only space flight Bruce McCandless had, was it? The MMU test. Well,
right. So 84 was the cool MMU flight, and I think folks remember him for that and that great photograph. But I think he would have said and would like to have talked about his role in not only deploying but actually designing and then later assisting in the repair of the Hubble Space Telescope, which, as you know, is having some problems as we speak today. We were talking earlier about someone who's working on James Webb and laughing about how we hope they're expediting matters, because I don't think Hubble's dead yet, but it's not looking good for the little satellite that could. As we call it. I mean, so he got involved in Hubble. Now I hope I'm remembering this correctly. He first got involved around 78, and the flight. We talked about the shuttle design and production of the shuttle being delayed. Hubble was notorious for for delays, just as James Webb is actually notorious for delays and cost increases. But originally, John Young was going to fly the mission for deployment of Hubble, but in the early '80s, and then particularly after the Challenger explosion, Bruce McCandless and Kathy Sullivan and some of the great engineers at Lockheed Martin were involved in not only getting the Hubble Space Telescope ready to fly, but making sure that it could be repaired and maintained in space. And Kathy Sullivan, whom you've had on your show,
yep.
And who is a brilliant woman, has written a great book about that whole process. I don't go into it because, frankly, she knows a lot more about it than I do, and her book is pretty authoritative on the subject. But they spent a lot of time making sure that people could go up and fix Hubble if need be. And as you know, after deployment in April of 1990 on STS-31, sure enough, the Hubble needed some work. That may be putting it mildly. The main mirror didn't have imperfections. It was ground, or whatever they do to mirror it. It was produced perfectly, but to incorrect specifications. They didn't get the specifications quite right. So as you recall, STS-31, which was Lauren Shriver and Charlie Bolden and Steve Hawley, Kathy Sullivan, and Bruce McCandless, they came back to Earth heroes for deploying this great telescope. And then within just a few months, they were, NASA and sort of the subject of a lot of jokes for putting up something that looked like it was going to be a huge waste of money. And it was a big black eye for NASA. And it was until '93 NASA managed to set up a crew to fix the space telescope, and of course it's been up there ever since. And it's hard to overstate the importance it's had for our astronomers.
Bruce McCandless carries on being involved with the Hubble telescope at that point, doesn't he?
He does. So he was on the Hubble deployment mission in April of 1990, and then he retired from NASA after 24 years in August of 1990, and immediately went to work for the Space Telescope Science Institute panel that was put together to try to figure out how to get the Hubble Space Telescope working properly, and the members of that panel were a pretty impressive group. Guys like Jim Crocker and even Lyman Spitzer, who was the guy who first came up with the idea of not the idea, but came up with first prominent U.S. advocate for launching and using a space observatory. And lots of ideas came in, and the panel duly considered them all. Bruce McCandless was on the panel because he's the guy who knew about what astronauts could and couldn't do in space with the telescope. And he was characteristically modest about his role. He said he was the auto mechanic on the committee and was the one who had to figure out whether you actually could turn the bolts and maneuver parts and that sort of thing inside the chassis, as it were, of the telescope. And sure enough, the panel managed to put together a plan. Jim Crocker was really instrumental in that. I don't know if you know that story, but I can't tell it right because I don't understand the technical aspects well enough. But Jim Crocker was an engineer and really a smart guy who came up with the idea for how to fix the Hubble when he was in Germany and was taking a shower, and something about the shower mechanism and valves, cued him into a way that they might be able to fix Hubble, and that's a story worth reading right there. But anyway, they got it fixed, and Hubble's been responsible for all sorts of discoveries ever since. You've talked about some of them on your show. I mean, it's it's been super important for discovering and studying exoplanets, for example. I talked recently I'm a graduate of the University of Texas in Austin here in the U.S. And sure enough, the University of Texas Astronomy Department, a couple of the professors there are using the Hubble. Even now, well, maybe not now. As of 2 or 3 weeks ago, we're using it to study a comparatively new exoplanet. At some point when they talked about these numbers, I think it was, you're gonna laugh, I think it was 379 light years. Is that even possible? Studying these.
I keep forgetting because they're so astronomical, the numbers, that you go, have I got that right?
I literally have trouble believing. In fact, I said that to one of these guys, and I said, you're not capable of directly imaging something like that, right? And you're basically just intuiting this. You're basically fabricating your research, aren't you? And he said, no, we're able to. They're using some little nano band of the infrared. Your co-host Lynn would know better how to talk about this, but yeah, I mean, so Hubble's been instrumental in figuring out that there are black holes in the center of other galaxies, and trying to pinpoint the age of trying to estimate the age of the universe, and all kinds of things. And the joke was that when the astronauts, when Mcandless and Kathy Sullivan, Steve Hawley, who by the way, probably one of NASA's smartest astronauts, they were all joking before the mission that they'd gone ahead and destroyed their astronomy books before leaving because Hubble was going to rewrite them all, and to a certain extent, they were correct.
I mean, I think just for public outreach, Hubble Space Telescope's been one of the most extraordinary successes of NASA. Full stop.
Yeah, and I think that's a good estimation, and James Webb is going to be extraordinary as well, but I don't think it's going to have quite. I'm not sure it's going to produce quite the same pictures.
No.
You probably, I think you guys talked about that.
Yeah, we mentioned. Yeah, well, we mentioned it. I think you're right. It's going to be hard to have the sort of, like you said, the pillars of creation is in optical light or thereabouts.
Yeah, but enhanced maybe.
Enhanced, yeah, but it's like false color, but it's still something that the eye can, the human brain can kind of understand. I think there'll be amazing imagery from James Webb, but perhaps not so immediate as the Hubble stuff. Because I mean, it always reminds me of the picture of the black hole. That picture of a black hole that they did a couple of years ago is mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing if you're I think especially if you're an astrophysicist. But if you're a punter, if you're just a normal person, it's like, it doesn't look as good as the picture of the black hole on the film Interstellar. It's like, yeah, it doesn't. But whereas I think, Hubble's pictures were better than the images that you'd had in movies up until that point. It's been so influential on film and the way that we portray space and everything else, because it's.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It's almost like it went even beyond the imaginations of folks who tried to envision that sort of thing for movies and artwork and that sort of, yeah. So absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's brought the sort of beauty of space into people's lives, hasn't it? It's it's revealed. Yeah. It's opened up a window that we'd never really seen before. And I think, I mean, just to be part of that. Well, to be not just a part, but like obviously an incredibly important part of not just once but twice to get the space shuttle. Yeah. So
I mean, I think that, like I said, I think that was his proudest. I think that's the project he was proudest of.
Yeah, because that must
associated with. Yeah.
I mean, that must have been quite a moment when he retired from NASA. Anyway, to have worked for an agency for that long. Or to work in any job for that long and then go somewhere else. I mean,
yeah. Well, it's a good point. He was at NASA for 24 years, which is a long stay certainly, and then he went to work for Lockheed Martin after a brief stint with the Space Telescope Science Institute folks. And in 2014, when my mom passed away, I was talking to him, and he revealed that he was still working for Lockheed Martin, and so he went from 24 years at NASA to 24 years at Lockheed Martin, and so that's 48 years of astronomical, I guess it's aeronautical engineering, space engineering, and there's only one way to explain that, and that is he loved doing it. I mean, we haven't talked much about his early life, but like a lot of folks who get into who work for NASA or go into space exploration generally, he wanted to do this from the time he was very young, and he talks about reading Willy Ley, the German science writer, and being captivated by the illustrations of Chesley Bonestell, who was sort of the Hubble Space Telescope of his day. Who basically composed these crazy, moody, somber, but somehow beautiful space tableau of
amazing
people, landing on these purple moons, and they're still pretty captivating. Believe it or not, you can go back and look at
I love
stuff.
them. I love all that early art. Yeah, it's great.
So he, from the time he was 10, certainly his mother sometimes claimed from the age of 3, which I think was an exaggeration. But from the time he was 10, he was wanting to do this, and despite the frustrations for a period of his career, I think he got to do exactly what he wanted to do, and he went on to work at Lockheed Martin on the Mars. Was it the Phoenix, not the Polar Explorer, but the Phoenix probe that landed successfully, and worked with the company in acquiring the Russian rockets, and had a pretty interesting career even after leaving NASA. So and some of that's in the book too. I didn't, some of that stuff I'm not sure. It's the astronaut stuff that's interesting, but I do talk a little bit about his career after that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting to see how people develop, and because I mean, one question that you can obviously answer more directly than virtually anyone else is, what's it like having a dad go into space, particularly a space flight after the shuttle disaster.
Yeah.
What's it like to be, because presumably you were older than a lot of children are when they're, children of astronauts are usually quite young, aren't they? But you would have been older. What was it like?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I grew up in El Lago, which was one of the, I think there were 3 sort of communities where a lot of the astronauts lived. One was El Lago, and one was Timber Cove, and another was Nassau Bay, and they were all south and east of the Manned Spacecraft Center, later the Johnson Space Center, So yeah, I knew a lot of the families and kids in the Apollo program, and you're right. I mean, it was a different experience for some of those kids when their dads went up, and it was probably a pretty daunting experience, I would think. To be an 8-year-old kid and have the news vans parked outside your house, and your mom frantic with worry and not quite understanding what's going on. I mean, I was 22. I didn't understand what was going on either, but I was considerably older, and I was a grad student over there in the United Kingdom, and watched most of it on TV. And I think, Dad was on the 11th shuttle mission, and I don't think we had a real sense that it was dangerous at that. Well, some people probably did. I didn't have a real sense that it was dangerous at that point. I mean, we hadn't had any in-space fatalities in the American space program at that point. So I was excited. I was intrigued. I wasn't worried. I was a little embarrassed. The press tracked me down at Reading, and the administration asked me to have some photographs taken. So they managed to get me holding up a photograph, like a newspaper headline with my dad's flight, and I was next to a Space Invaders video game or something like that. It was ridiculous. But no, I wasn't particularly worried. I mean
surely you must have had like ultimate bragging rights next to your fellow students. I mean that
was fun.
I mean that's the ultimate chat up line in a student bar, isn't it? Oh.
How did you know that? No, it was cool, and British people are so wonderful that they'll act interested even if they're not interested, and so I was able to talk about it to my heart's content, and I mean perfectly to be sincere. I mean, my friends there, especially my friend Dave Taylor, who was in graduate school with me, were very excited, very supportive, and probably more fascinated by the whole thing than I was. We were just glad that he finally got a flight.
So was that because you'd sort of grown up in that whole culture of like, oh, your next door neighbor has gone up on a flight, and oh, one of my other neighbors has gone up on a flight, so it just becomes I mean, had it sort of been normalized, and therefore like your fellow students, your friends would have gone, this is amazing, but you're slightly more, it's all right.
Right. I think that's exactly right. My mom and dad were not very sociable people, and they weren't. I'm going to say that sounds bad. They weren't unpleasant people. They weren't discourteous people. They were nice. They were nice people, but they didn't socialize much, especially with the NASA crowd, and they were always very anxious to let us know that my sister and me know that there was nothing special about us. Dad might be going up in space, but hey, he's worked for it. You guys haven't worked for anything, and there may be press, but there may be tourist buses outside. There may be journalists coming to talk to you. Just don't have anything to do with them. You're just normal people, and tourist buses never showed up outside our house. If they're out there, I'm still waiting to see them. And we never got journalists at our house, because Dad didn't have a flight. Certainly that was the case for the Hayeses and the Russos and folks like that. But I suppose it was kind of normalized. And like I say, we didn't have a sense. I didn't have a sense then that the shuttle was going to turn out to be as risky as it really was. So I was not particularly worried. I can't say the same for my mom and my sister. I wasn't here for the launch, but I'm pretty sure my mom would have been more or less terrified.
Did you go to see the second launch?
I did. Yeah, I was working in New York City at the time, and I went down for the launch. And the first time, I think it was called off. I think it was delayed, postponed for a couple of weeks. So I went back to New York, and then the second time went down, and everything went off. And that was a little bit more nerve wracking because obviously some events had occurred in the meantime. But it was exciting as well. And I don't know. I mean, I didn't really, I guess, I was, like I said, I was older by then. I was 28, 29. So I was mostly concerned about, being there for my mom, who was a nervous wreck, and trying to be calm and NASA like myself.
And what about when the shuttle lands? Is that a moment of, oh, it's landed? It's.
Oh, was it? think it was the MMU mission that was actually the first to land back in Florida. But I wasn't there for either one, so I don't know.
Right.
I think it's the launch that's really the nerve-wracking part. I know re-entry isn't particularly safe either. It's the front end and the back end are the dangerous parts. But certainly my mom was there. My sister may have been there too, but I wasn't there for either of the returns. But they went well. So.
Well, yeah, they certainly did. Yeah. So when you is there a sort of moment in the book when you were researching this book that took you a little bit by surprise, a story that you hadn't kind of really known about before?
One thing that I didn't realize about my dad was that he and my mother Bernice were both big conservationists. They were animal. I won't say animal rights people. They were animal rehabilitation people. Big advocates for the environment and that sort of thing. And that was unusual in the 70s, and particularly unusual in Houston, which was gaining the reputation for being the energy capital of the world. Sort of the oil and gas drilling capital of the world. And my dad in particular was involved in rescuing and rehabilitating injured birds and animals and that sort of thing, and was eventually served as president of the Houston Audubon Society, which is a big bird conservation group here in Houston. And I sort of knew about that and actually was involved in some of the activities associated with that, with conservation. Like we helped to clean up an area of Houston that was later turned into a nature preserve. But I didn't realize how it may have affected his career at NASA. He had sort of a reputation for being a little bit of a crank about environmental matters. And at one point he was actually made even after the travails of missing out on Apollo and Skylab, in the late 70s, he was tasked with being the bird control officer for landings down at the Kennedy Space Center, and I've always wondered whether that was legitimate or whether that was an attempt, whether that was an ironic assignment, but. His job was to figure out how to keep the astronauts safe from impact with birds down there at the Cape Canaveral area, and it wasn't entirely an idle worry. I mean, Ted Freeman was an astronaut who was killed in the 60s when his T-38 was impacted by a bird. So it did happen, but I sometimes, one astronaut in an interview said that sometimes it seemed like he was more interested in saving the birds than in getting a flight, and I can assure you that was not the case. But I think at times his environmental interests may have impacted his career development, and that was a little bit of a surprise. It's not a disappointing surprise. I mean, it's kind of cool, but and I actually found a book he kept back in the 70s that related to animal rehabilitation when he talks about, rescuing or finding and tending for 3 baby screech owls whose mother had been poisoned with some sort of organophosphate compound. So that was interesting and fun to read about. The other thing that I thought was interesting was I found I think I mentioned that my mom and dad just kept everything. I found a file from 1961 that related to a crash. Bruce McCandless was flying I think it was the A4, which was the A4, the Skyhawk, I believe. Anyway, he had taken off from the USS Forrestal. He was a young fighter pilot, and and performed a mission. And when he came back to land on the aircraft carrier, the arresting wire actually tore off a piece of the rear end of the jet aircraft, and so he was faced with the situation every Navy aircraft pilot dreads, which is you've just scrubbed a whole lot of speed to get down on the deck of the carrier. The arresting wire hasn't stopped you. You're still moving, and you're heading for the end of the runway. What do you do? Well, he made the right call, and he shoved the plane into. He activated the afterburner and basically took off. Again, was able to get the plane back off the aircraft carrier, but he was radioed from the ship that the plane was on fire. And he looked back, and sure enough, there was a 50-foot plume of fire coming out of the back of the plane. And he couldn't activate the eject mechanism, and he was afraid he was going to have to do something extremely dangerous, which was basically roll the plane over to one side and basically bail out. Either that or just put the plane down in the water. Neither one of those options was a very good one. So he kept fighting and finally got the what's called the mast to come down over his face and ejected. And ejecting from a jet aircraft is a hazardous maneuver in and of itself. But he was able to get out and parachuted down into the Mediterranean, and the helicopters came to get him. And it turned out okay, but it was a dangerous moment, and it was something, and maybe even worse. The Navy, in its bureaucratic majesty, investigated the crash and tried to figure out what had happened. And so he spent, several nerve-wracking months waiting for the verdict of the Navy panel on what had occurred and why. And it turned out there was a crack in the underside of the jet, and the arresting wire had, that's why the mechanism had failed. And it wasn't because he was going too fast or something like that. So he was exonerated, and his career survived that could have been a crippling blow. And he would never really talk about that. I mean, I might have heard about it once or twice. My mom mentioned it, but he would never mention it. Certainly never talk about it of his own accord, at least when we were young. And so I was fascinated to read that and read all the witness statements and description of the equipment and, airspeed and conditions and that sort of thing. And finally get a chance to understand a little bit more about my dad that he would not have talked about himself. I mean,
it must be an amazing thing to write a book about your dad and then realize it's a pretty extraordinary life, isn't it? Really?
It is, as his brother. His brother was a very intelligent and accomplished man himself, and his measured response to that sort of question that I asked him was that he was an extraordinary person, and I hope he wasn't a perfect person, but I hope the fact that he was an extraordinary person comes across in the book. So, and that's that whole ejecting from the jet aircraft story is one reason why.
Yeah, I mean it's quite funny how many times that the ejecting from a critically dangerous situation seems to repeat across all the the Neil Armstrongs and the John Youngs.
Armstrong certainly did it, and Jim Lovell almost didn't do it. Mike Collins was injured in a crash, I think, injured his back. Yeah, so maybe that's a fighter pilot badge of honor, or maybe it's an indication that you weren't flying right. I don't know, but you're right. It does seem to have occurred quite a bit. I was going to say Armstrong walked away from several life endangering incidents, so he may have been the most extraordinary of all.
Yeah. I mean, is a lot of the book done from, like you said, if your dad kept like hundreds and hundreds of files and kept everything hoarded. Is a lot of it from that, or is a lot of it from your own recollections of the time and the events yourself?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, you were asking very early on, where did the urge to write the book come from? And part of it was the feeling that, hey, this is something that he wanted to write, but he never got around to doing it. Another reason for doing it is because I realized I had the source. I had the sources. I mean, my dad was his own archivist in a sense, and basically everything I needed was contained in an entirely haphazard fashion in 400 boxes. So all I had to do was look through the 400 boxes, and I was good. And then so that's I hope that's most of the book. I mean, the book's about him, but I couldn't write it. I felt like in an interesting fashion without talking a little bit about our lives in down in the Clear Lake area, and I'd probably talk a little bit more about our family and my relationship with him. I'd probably talk about that a little bit more than I should have, but it was hard to resist. And so I'd say it's probably 2/3 history and archival material and straight biography, and another third more impressionistic discussion of the times and cultural issues and political issues, that sort of thing.
When does the book come out?
So it comes out here on July 13th, I think is the official release date. We're actually hoping to have copies before that, and then it may be slightly later there in the UK.
Yeah, I think I've got a date here of the 29th of July on the UK Amazon. That's what I'm going by. So I think it might. I think it looks like it's then.
I had the materials and it's some first-hand knowledge, and I was also helped by some great folks at NASA and at Lockheed Martin, and some of the guys my dad worked with. Kathy Sullivan was real helpful. Hoot Gibson was helpful. I talked to Jack Lausma and Fred Hayes a little bit as well. So I'm sure there are lots of mistakes in there. They're nobody's fault but mine. But hopefully I put together a decent read for everybody.
Yeah, what was your sort of main takeaway from the kind of whole experience of writing about a singular person, whether it's your dad or not? Yeah,
well, it's I think a lot of biographers have said this, and I can understand a little bit, but now as you end up sacrificing a little bit of your own life to focus on someone else's and what they were dealing with and what they were thinking about. And I think it's, if you admire the person you're writing about, then I think it's worth it. On the other hand, at some point you have to disengage and go back to live in your own life as well. I guess what I was impressed with, really what I was impressed with my dad was his refusal to go away, to give up. I mean, even after, in 78, when my dad had been there for 12 years, hadn't gotten to fly, was pretty disappointed that he hadn't. And then, this new group of, 35 bright young astronauts who come into the program, and Mike Mullane's written about that and said, we all wondered what the heck these old guys were doing and why they were hanging around, because they were dinosaurs, and Bruce McCandless was one of those guys, and it was right around this time that he was made bird control officer, and so he I just can't. That's tough, and he's got these articles in his files saying, hey, you're a washout, and he finds it within himself to keep working, and the shuttle was his opportunity, and he figured out how to lobby for himself and to lobby for the project. And there was a satellite called the Solar Max satellite that went up and functioned for about 6 months and then went kaput. And he immediately saw this as a way to use the MMU. Hey, we're gonna take the MMU and run out there and grab the Solar Max and bring it back to the shuttle, and we'll fix it. And it took a while for that idea to catch on. And there are notes that I was able to look at and talked about a little bit in the book, where he was having to lobby not only at NASA, but lobby indirectly members of Congress to get the funding for it. And there's a story in there where he enlists the aid of Jack Glassman and Jack Schmidt to talk to a recalcitrant congressman about the project. And he's told, look, Bruce, stop making this into a science project and tell them how you're going to save the country money, and and what's the point. And so he quickly was able to recalibrate his message to say, hey, we're going to go out there and get the satellite and fix it, so we're not going to be wasting millions of dollars. And that seemed to help. So
yeah, I mean it's like it's the ultimate example of someone that stays on the bus long enough instead of getting off and restarting another journey somewhere else, isn't it, really?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it.
It is really funny, but out of the sort of space shuttle astronauts, I can't name many. It's Bruce McCandless is definitely one of those ones that is a big name, and it perhaps is the most iconic image of a spaceman.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, and there's a great photograph of Ed White back in '65 doing his spacewalk, but certainly this one is right up there. And I spend a little bit of time in the book, talking about why we think it's such an interesting image. That part you may find is impressionistic and entirely spurious, but I try. No, but I mean, it shows up on all over the place. I was driving to Houston last year. And my wife and I were driving down the freeway, and the furniture truck went by us and had a big image of Bruce McCandless and the MMU for some reason associated with furniture sales. And so you never know where you're going to see it.
No, it's
around. Sure.
But even it's even sort of referenced even without the image being there. That whole sort of whenever you see someone being lonely on a often it's space, but it can even be like adrift at sea. Somehow it's referencing that photo, because it is about kind of just utter sort of isolation and like that's it. You're just the one human there. It's like it's an incredible image. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible image. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the video footage at the time didn't quite land, but it just goes to show the importance of an image. I guess it goes back to that Hubble thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Bruce McCandless was involved indirectly and directly with some of the most important space inspirational photography out there, right?
Absolutely. So the importance, the takeaway message is stay on the bus.
Stay on the bus. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I say it to my students a lot. Staying on the bus is and this is the ultimate example of it. Well, thanks very much. I've taken a long time out of your time.
No, well, Matthew, thank you. I'm like I said, I'm a fan of the show. I enjoyed
that's brilliant. Thank you.
Episodes of on exoplanets and nuclear propulsion and The Expanse. I'm a fan of that show.
Yeah,
and it's a thrill for me to be on the show. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, did you watch the For All Mankind? Because that's your.
Yeah, we're actually my wife and I and one of my daughters are actually watching it now. I think we've watched either 3 or 4 episodes from the first season, and I mean, I like it. It gets a lot of things right. I mean, some of the actual. They're not using Ellington Air Force Base for their actual. That's not it, and they're not using Highway 3, and the outpost doesn't really look that way. But they do a good job of getting the feel of it right, and we're enjoying it. I mean, who knows if the Soviets had been able to keep the N-1 rocket pointed the right way, and maybe it would have worked. I don't know. It's kind of fun. I'm enjoying it. Do you like it? Are you a fan?
No, absolutely. I've enjoyed that more than I think any. I mean, there's been quite a lot of space programs recently, and I think I've enjoyed that more than any of them. The second season is brilliant. It's so good.
Oh, I've heard. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, it's very, very good. So yeah, I'm a little bit jealous that you're watching it for the first time. Right. Well. Thanks very much. I'll let you get on with the rest of your day, and I can't wait to read this book.
The Interplanetary podcast is alive.
alive! There we go, Julio.
So, Matt, what do you think of the interview?
Well, like I said, I love that interview. I think he's a really, really nice guy. You know, he's a proper pro writer, so it's one of those space books that actually, you know, is a joy to read.
What else has he written about?
He doesn't normally write about space.
That's why I'm wondering what is his main line of work.
He normally writes fiction, poems, stories, essays, writes for the Seattle Review, the Asian Wall Street Journal. He's a writer, basically.
This is very special that he got to do this book, as he explains.
Yeah,
I found it quite touching because his dad wanted to do it or was about to do it, and it's sort of a passing the torch and completing that.
Yeah.
It's a way to make your parent live a little bit longer in your heart.
Yeah.
Right?
I like the quote in there as well that about, you know, you have to give up a little bit of your life in writing about someone else's life. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it?
He talks a little bit about the experience of these astronauts going to space, and you guys talk a little bit about the age of the kids, right? And we mentioned in the past, John Glenn, his first flight had a 40% chance of failure, correct? Is that the figure? Yeah. I don't exactly remember the source, but the point that was that for John Glenn, his kids were also sort of at university level, so they would understand better the risks involved. While when Apollo 11 went to the moon, the kids were, I actually don't know, 6, 10, that age range, you know, like...
Yeah, they're all very young, so they're just about old enough to understand what's going on, but not quite old enough to understand.
Yeah, that your dad is going into space, that I'm not sure... It would be interesting to ask some of them at some point, those that were at that age. I'm not sure what you feel if you are aware of the dangers and risks, especially in those times, right?
If your dad says, I'm going to come back, you believe them, don't you? But I wonder if there is a little bit of trauma in there.
Yeah, but as a parent, I would never give that promise because you don't know you're going to come back.
Oh, well, deep. Yeah, I don't. It's deep, yeah. I mean, crikey, yeah, I don't know.
But I found that very touching because I always thought how, when you have kids so young, you would strap yourself onto a rocket. But then again, that's what these guys did all the time. They risked their lives all the time in planes, as test pilots. So it's just part of it, right? Difficult to understand myself, but that's the life.
Go back to the original quote. There are a subset of members who are willing to put their lives at risk to push the boundaries of our existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, some of those are fathers and mothers.
Another part that I found quite interesting was the one that he mentions his dad and his mom educating the kids to not feel special because his dad was an astronaut, that they were just normal people, and how much he emphasized that the parents were not socialites, the socialite type. I found it very, very interesting because so you don't grow entitled, you know, that you don't expect more because of who your dad is or this sort of approach. And that's some good education there from the parents to the kids. And, and then, of course, yes, as you mentioned, the Hubble, which personally I find that mission way cooler than the MMU one, because what's interesting, and I think we mentioned it in the past because we interviewed Kathy Sullivan, right? During the Hubble deployment mission, Kathy and Bruce McCandless, they were in the airlock preparing to assist in case of a mishap during the Hubble deployment, right? And some of the solar panels were a little bit stuck. So Kathy and Bruce McCandless suited up and were preparing at the airlock to go outside in case that was needed. So, I mean, in the end, they didn't have to, but they were in the airlock doing the let's say, the pre-breathing, the preparation, suiting up in a way, in a literal way. And and always then that story that they were the closest to the Hubble and the only people on Earth that could not see the deployment of the Hubble. And that all of their colleagues in the cockpit of the shuttle could see it live through the window, but not them because they were in the airlock. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing that we got to interview Kathy and now we get to interview the son of Bruce McCandless.
You are right. I mean, I think Hubble's obviously way more important than the MMU, and the fact that obviously Bruce McCandless was deeply involved in Hubble. That's.
Well, I mean, the MMU is as cool as a jetpack can get. We were promised jetpacks decades ago, and I'm still waiting.
Yeah.
But the Hubble just changed humankind.
Yeah, still struggling a little bit. So let's hope it hangs on till James Webb can take over.
Yeah. Which, by the way, again, Kathy and Bruce worked on the serviceability of the Hubble. We talked a little bit about before, but they worked together on designing together with huge teams of engineers, obviously. But yeah, testing the tools that they would use during the EVAs. When Kathy and Bruce McCandless were involved with all that design that later was used during the actual service missions of the Hubble. So they had connection to that on other than the deployment mission itself. They left their mark in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people just think of astronauts as just having that one job of going to space and just doing the bit in space. But of course, their job is way more than that.
Engineers, scientists, doctors, whatever. But they are whatever the background is. But you have lots of things to do. And I mean, I recall the interview with Matthias Maurer. And he was doing management at some point, and all those expeditions to test, to test tooling in case of planetary expeditions.
Yeah, apparently it's only Thomas Pesquet that's a little bit lazy, doesn't really do anything other than flying. That's not true. I just made that up.
You Brits really cannot have a successful French going around. Eh?
No, I don't know why I picked on Thomas Pesquet. I think it was because I saw him today showing off on the International Space Station. He was doing some chin-ups.
Wow, he's a very good-looking guy, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, he was looking really buff as well. He's looking Tres hench.
I mean, if I look like that, I would be posing for photos all the time.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe when he comes back, he can be the next Superman or something. Oh, yeah. In Marvel, in the X-Men, they have Gambit, which is sort of Frenchy. I know someone who knows better would kill me. Yeah, there you go. You could have Thomas Pesquet as that. I don't know how good of an actor he would be.
Maybe he's just too serious a person, really, to be doing frivolous things like that, Julio. I don't know why you started picking on Thomas.
I did not pick on Thomas Pesquet. Actually, he's a very lovely guy. He's a very lovely guy. But, astronauts are really busy people. But the time I met him, he was super nice.
Matthias is still our favorite, isn't he?
Yes, but that's because he studied part of his career in Argentina. I mean, there is something else there,
Yeah, actually, Tim Peake's my favourite. Actually, Helen Sharman's. Oh, I don't know who my favourite is, Julio. I've decided I'm not going to have a favourite.
Probably my most favourite astronaut of all times would be Gus Grissom.
Or my favourite's John Young.
See, that came easy, right?
Only because STS-1. That's just got to be the most ridiculous flight of all time, surely.
Yeah. I mean, Gus Grissom, I don't know, there's just something to it. Had it not been for Apollo 1, some say that he would have been the first man on the moon.
But you could say that Alexei Leonov, Yuri Gagarin, can't let those two off either. They're
I think
Yuri
Leonov,
Gagarin.
Okay, Leonov is up there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, Julio, we better finish this one up, or else. So I can actually watch the end of the football.
What else would you do rather than recording this podcast?
Right, that's it. You are so bad. You're so bad. Oh, Sugar and Italy have equalised. Oh, that's horrible.
Okay, Matt.
But anyway,
I think I will release you and let you watch football. I might even watch a little bit myself.
Yeah.
I hope you win. Then we can have a double happy weekend. My team won the Copa America, and yours maybe we'll know in a few minutes.
That's making me feel sick. Right. Bye. Goodbye, Spot Cats!